David was from Bethlehem of Judah. There is another Bethlehem. That Bethlehem is Bethlehem of Zebulun. Bethlehem of Zebulun is close to another famous town called Nazareth. David is from Bethlehem of Judah. That is the Bethlehem, and that is just a short distance south of Jerusalem. David's pedigree, David's lineage, David's ancestors are beautifully laid out in a book that precedes the book that I'm going to be talking about. That book is called the Book of Ruth. Ruth was one of his great-great-great-grandmothers. She was from Moab, so she wasn't from Israel. She was from Moab. And of course, it's a very feel-good age gap love story about Ruth meeting a man named Boaz. They had a child, a boy. That boy, his name is Obed, and Obed had a son whose name was Jesse, and Jesse had David. So Jesse is the father of David. David's family is huge by modern standards. He has 7 brothers, and we're going to hear about those brothers. They're not talked about as much as his sisters. So David had 2 sisters, and they are talked about a whole lot. They're almost always exclusively mentioned in the context of his nephews, their sons. So one of his sister's names is Zeruiah. Zeruiah had 3 sons, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Joab was the captain of the host once David became king. That means he was the general of his army. Joab was brilliant. He was also brutal and extraordinarily ambitious. Abishai, the brother of Joab, another nephew of David's, was David's personal bodyguard. Of course, he wasn't the only bodyguard of David's. David had a ton of bodyguards, but Abishai is definitely mentioned as one of his mighty men, brave soldier. In fact, Abishai saved David's life later on when David was older. For some reason, David decided that it's a great idea to go out there and keep fighting. And unlike some other kings that came after David, David never disguised himself in battle to confuse the opposing army. So they just kept gunning for him and wanted to kill him, obviously, because this was King David after all. So Abishai had to step in and save him. And after that little incident, of course, David in his old age, again, who knows why he decided to do that, but they had to have a little intervention with him. So they sat him down and told him, hey, listen, we don't want to extinguish the light of God in Jerusalem, so you better sit down and not fight anymore. So I guess his fighting days were over at that point. The third son of Zeruiah that we know of, his name is Asahel. Asahel died earlier in the civil wars. We know a little bit about him, but not as much as the other 2 brothers. So those are the sons of Zeruiah that we know about. Now, David was the youngest of those 8 brothers. And David's nephews are not that much younger than him. So I would say somewhere around 10 years younger than him. They're still younger, but not that much younger than him. So David's other sister, her name is Abigail. Abigail, not to be confused with Abigail that later became David's wife. That's a different Abigail. Apparently 3,000 years ago, the name Abigail was relatively popular, so we have 2. Abigail's son, of course, she's also mentioned in the context of her son. Her son's name is Amasa. Amasa was at the level of Joab, so he was a general, and he was assassinated by Joab, so he was assassinated by his cousin. Once again, Joab, extremely brutal, very capable general, difficult to replace, but unfortunately, he assassinated Amasa in a power struggle, and of course, Joab deserves his own program, so I'll talk about him one of these days. So after David became king, his family became extraordinarily powerful. So this is by far the most powerful family in the Bible. Now, God talked about David a whole lot. So this purple book that I have over here, this is the King James Version, It is 985 pages, of course, small font. It's if you lay it out like a normal book, it will be about 2,200 pages or so, probably more than that. But in those 985 pages, David is mentioned more than 970 times. 970 times he is talked about. Of course, if you believe in God and you believe this book is inspired, of course, that's where the word inspiration comes from. It's inspired by the Holy Spirit, right? Then you would know that God talked about David a whole lot. Jesus Christ talked about David a whole lot. He quoted David's poetry. He, of course, quoted stories about David constantly. David, on the other hand, also talked about God a whole lot. David also talked about Jesus Christ a whole lot, even though David was born 1,000 years prior to Jesus Christ. Of course, Jesus Christ came from the seed of David as promised by God. And David prophesied about Jesus Christ multiple times. I'm going to read to you one of those instances. And this is in the book of Psalms. This is the second psalm that is written by David. Of course, he wrote the vast majority of the book of Psalms. So here is Psalm 2. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, the Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. So, of course, if you're a Christian, there are so many clues here that talk about Christ that it is hard to just not see that when you're reading it. Of course, the Son that is begotten, kiss the Son lest he be angry, put their trust in him, and so on and so on. Give thee the heathen for thine inheritance. Of course, the heathen is people like us that were engrafted into the family of Jesus Christ through our belief in Christ. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about the rise of the house of David, and I'm picking up the story in the first book of Samuel. So that is book 1 of Samuel, and I'm picking up the story in chapter 16. So this is after God had rejected King Saul, because King Saul committed one too many transgressions. Probably one of the worst transgressions he committed was attempt to be a priest and sacrifice to God. That is something that God explicitly forbade. There's a specific tribe that was allowed to sacrifice to God, and only that tribe, and that is the Levites. So, unfortunately, King Saul disobeyed God multiple times, and God rejected him. Samuel was a prophet who anointed King Saul. So, what does it mean to get anointed? What that means is when God finds and chooses someone to be king, he becomes anointed. It was actually a physical anointing. So, Samuel would carry a cup of oil and just literally pour it head of the chosen one, right? And of course, not many people would want to have oil poured on their head, but I will take that. My God, I will take that oil any day of the week. So Samuel loved King Saul, and even though he told him that he's getting rejected because of his many transgressions, he still mourned for him. So this is where I pick up. And this is chapter 16, verse 1, and I'm going to read that to you so you get an idea of what's going on, and of course you'll get acquainted a little bit with the King James Version language, 17th century English. And the Lord said unto Samuel, how long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel. Fill thine horn with oil, and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. So, Samuel did not know the family of Jesse the Bethlehemite. He did not know David. He had never met that family. God spoke directly to Samuel and told him, go to Bethlehem, and then I will show you the one that I have chosen. So, this is where Samuel meets the family of Jesse, and this is where Samuel meets David. So, now, what happens is David is out herding sheep. David was a shepherd, and of course, the parallels between Jesus Christ and David are absolutely uncanny. Of course, Jesus Christ is the good shepherd, right? David was a literal shepherd. And in stark contrast to Jesus Christ, who was never described physically for a very good reason, David was described physically in extraordinary detail. And I will read and I will explain what he looked like and how people perceived him. There is no other person in this book that is described in such specific detail physically, okay? So here in a little bit, we'll get a really good idea of what he looked like and how people perceived him. Now, whenever Samuel meets the family of Jesse, David is out herding sheep, so he's not present at the time. So here's what happens. And this is verses 6 through 7 in the same chapter. And it came to pass when they were come that he looked on Eliab and said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh at the heart, on the heart. Okay? So, when he sees Eliab is the eldest brother of David, okay? When he sees Eliab, he's understandably confused because now remember, Samuel anointed King Saul. King Saul was an imposing man, so whenever people saw him, they thought, okay, this must be the one who God chose, because he's described as a head taller than everyone else. So whenever Samuel, who had previously anointed King Saul, sees Eliab, who is a tall man, he thinks that's got to be the one. And God tells him, not look at outward appearances. That's not how I look at people, right? So this is a clear warning to people in general. Don't look at outward appearances. Look at what's inside, right? So now, Jesse presents all the other 6 brothers, so 7 total. He presents them to Samuel, and God says, no, none of those are him. So therefore, Samuel tells Jesse, are these all of your sons? Right? Are these all of your sons? And Jesse tells him, no, I got one more. He's out there herding sheep, right? And Samuel tells him, bring him over here because we're not going to start eating before he gets here, right? And this is where we get the first description, physical description, David, okay? Here's how that goes. This is in verse 12. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Okay? Now, again, remember, this is 17th century English over here, but the description that we have, and I will explain what all this means, but the description that we have is extremely specific. So for the first thing that he says is, now he was ruddy. So ruddy, the root of that word, the Hebrew word itself is red. But what he describes in English, skin under, okay, so this is skin that has been touched by the sun. Of course, he was out in the sun all the time as a shepherd. It just doesn't only describe that bronze hue of the skin, it describes a liveliness to it, okay? He was very much alive. This man was very much alive, and his skin, it was just glowing, right? It was glowing. He was, the next description of him, and withal of a beautiful countenance. Now, countenance means face. So this literally tells you that his face was beautiful and goodly to look to. So that kind of, you can kind of understand what goodly to look to means, just overall a good-looking man. Now, this is repeated whenever Goliath faces David. Whenever Goliath faces David, this is literally repeated. Ruddy, fair countenance, youthful. And Goliath disdained him for it. So, disdain is not interchangeable with hate. Hate is hot. So hate arises from anger, and many times hate exacts vengeance, right? Whereas disdain is cold. It's dismissive. And it's usually people who are arrogant, they breed disdain. Okay? That's the difference between hate and disdain. Whenever Goliath sees David, he perceives exactly the same thing that the narrator here describes, that this man had a... That's how Goliath perceives him. So he was a good-looking young man, and he disdained him for it, right? So go figure that. Someone doesn't like you because you look good. I've never experienced that in my life. But either way, Goliath was also a hater. There's no doubt about that. And here in a little bit, we're going to find out exactly what happens to arrogant haters, right? So this is one of the reasons, and I go back and forth with friends about this, this is one of the reasons I just simply cannot watch any actor reenact David in movies. The reason is because we get a brilliant idea of what this man looked like, okay? And this goes on and on and on. I'll talk about that here in just a second. And with Jesus Christ, I think it's just one of the reasons I didn't believe in Jesus Christ to begin with is because of the images that we see, but that's neither here nor there. So let's just continue here with the story and see what's going on. Now, around this time, King Saul gets what is referred to in this book as an evil spirit, okay? He gets an evil spirit. So one of his servants, one of King Saul's servants, suggests that they find someone who is good at playing an instrument so that he can calm down whenever that individual plays the instrument for King Saul, right? And one of those servants goes up to King Saul and says the following. Then answered one of the servants and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. So this is first of all, massive compliment to David. I mean, we're talking about, I'm going to go over every single line here, but no one in this book is described in a similar fashion, okay? I mean, this is extremely complimentary by one of King Saul's servants, right? So what does that mean? I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite that is cunning in playing. Cunning in playing means he was cunning back then in 17th century English was used not the way that we use cunning now, meaning sly or something sleazy. Cunning simply meant that he was very skilled at playing. And David played the harp, go figure, a shepherd playing the harp. So now this is just one of the things that he says about him, right? Cunning in playing, mighty valiant man. So valiant means brave, but not brave in the literal brave sense of the word. He was there was a nobility to his braveness. There was a purpose, right? He was noble in his braveness. That's what that means, valiant. And he just He was noble all through, and a man of war, man of war. So David is described as a man of war from now on constantly. He was a man of war and he was a man of God. That is repeated over and over and over again. Of course, a man of war comes with downsides. God did not allow David to build the temple because he had spilled too much blood, right? He was a man of war. What follows is prudent in matters. Prudent means reasonable, smart, wise, diligent. I mean, it's just something that someone is just really good at discerning things and just acting on his, based on brilliant wisdom, right? That's what prudent in matters means. And a comely person, and the Lord is with him. So comely is a word that we don't use anymore in English, unfortunately. It is used in the context of women. When used in the context of men, however, it is one of the greatest compliments that any man can receive by another person, okay, regardless of whether it's a man or a woman. Nothing entails that he was effeminate by any means. What comely means is there's a fusion between his spirit, his soul, his heart, and his outward appearance, right? So there's unforced grace about this man, right? We see his grace through and through whenever he meets his opponents and deals with people. Again, this is something that no actor on earth can fake. This is from being who you are, right? Again, he was real. He was alive. He was full of grace, right? The vast majority of people, especially the glamour of celebrities that you're going to encounter through images or maybe in real life, a lot of them are just simply fake, and unfortunately, many of them are just dead inside, right? This man was full of life. If you were to see this man in real life, your jaw would drop. There's, again, life in him was just brewing. I mean, he was something that, unfortunately, we don't come across in real life anymore, and this was exactly what David was. And again, that's precisely the reason I was saying earlier that it's very difficult for me to watch any reenactment of David, because what you're going to get is you're going to get literally 5% of who he was as a man. And it skews your idea of what's going on about this man. And the same thing with Jesus Christ, like I mentioned earlier. I mean, supposedly Christians would put a statue of this man in a random country, on a random mountain, call it Christ the Redeemer, and then go over there and take pictures with him, right? I mean, this is precisely what this book tells you not to do. If you're a Christian, supposedly you believe that Jesus Christ is God, right? I mean, unless I'm mistaken here, this is repeated 150 times. Of course, I'm not being literal here, but if Jesus Christ is God, why would we put him on a wall? Half of Europe does that, right? Let's just put him on a wall, literal graven image. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me, but, I'm over it. I got over that. But I still refuse to watch images of David. I refuse to watch images of Jesus Christ. And here's the thing, even if you don't believe in God, I promise you that watching images of people rather than imagining what they look like based on these descriptions, what it does is it messes with your imagination big time, okay? This is why storytelling is so brilliant, because it develops your imagination rather than looking at images that create your idea of who that person was. So this is gold. That's why this is gold, right? Anyway, so now we know what David looks like. Now we know what David is about as a person, how he presents himself to people, what they perceive. The next scene is in chapter 17, and what we have here is we have two opposing armies battle in array, right? So one army is on the one side, one mountain, the Philistines. There's a valley, and then on the other side, on a hill, mountain, whatever you want to call it, there's the army of King Saul, right? And what happens, 40 days, morning and evening, 40 days in a row, this man, one of the Philistine soldiers, he comes out in the middle of that field and goads the people and tells them, Bring me one man, I will fight him. If that man wins, then you rule over us, meaning wins, kill him, right? If I kill him, then we rule over you. So that's what's going on here, and I want to read to you what that scene looks like, okay? And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines. So a champion here means, and I'm just going to stop for just 1 second to explain what a champion is. It's not like a Super Bowl champion or a Premier League champion here. This is one of the, elite soldiers. I'm going to read these 3 verses, and then I'm going to go back and explain them because this literally needs a translation here, even though it's in English. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. Back and explain what this means, but we have conversion tables for people that are as sick as I am, and we go and convert this kind of stuff to get an idea of what that man looked like, right? What they were facing. So, first of all, note how Goliath is introduced. Goliath of Gath. Even to this day, whenever we introduce athletes prior to a, let's just say, American football game or maybe some sort of a fight, here's the name, right? He's this tall, and then he's from such and such university if he didn't graduate, such and such high school. If he didn't graduate high school, maybe such and such middle school. I don't know how far down they will go, but this man didn't graduate anything, obviously, 3,000 years ago. So he's from Gath. That's his hometown. Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Again, this is just a very typical intro of an athlete. In this case, this is a killer, professional killer, right? And so what is 6 cubits and a span? 6 cubits and a span is 9'9", okay? So imagine that. If you don't believe it, you can just simply imagine it. You don't have to believe it. But 9'9", okay? That's a, pretty formidable opponent there. He had a helmet of brass. So here's the thing. You know how now we give athletes their height and their weight? We're not given the weight of this man over here. That would be actually extraordinary if the narrator did. But what we're given is something a lot more than that. We're given the weight of his body armor and his weapons, okay? So let's go over that. A helmet of brass upon his head. Brass means bronze, okay? Steel. This is the Iron Age. Iron helmet. He was armed with a coat of mail. Coat of mail is just simply that chain mail that soldiers put on so that they don't get cut up whenever they're fighting someone, right? That's what a coat of mail is. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, right? So that's, again, bronze, iron. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs. Greaves of brass is literally shin guards, okay? Shin guards is what this guy had. And, of course, at 9'9", those shin guards probably come right up to my testicles, for lack of a better phrase there. But that's what he had. He had greaves of brass, so just metal shin guards, and a target of brass between his shoulders. So target is not, you understand target today. It's not like someone throwing darts at his back, right? I mean, target just in this case is a javelin, right? So this is a very typical weaponry, long-range weaponry at that point, or medium range, if you will. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. So this is allegorical to those people who were reading at that time. They would have understood that as to be massive, right? That's all this means. Spear, the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. One bearing a shield went before him means that he had an armor bearer. That was extremely normal for that day of age, right? So when you convert this to present day terms, the weight of his body armor, folks, you don't have to believe the 9'9" height. The weight of his body armor was 172 pounds. That's converting to today's measurements. 172 pounds. If you don't know pounds, that's about 78 kilograms, right? 172 pounds of body armor and weaponry on this man, right? So he was ready for battle. So he had a sword. Not sword was, by the way, normal measurements. He had a sword. He had a spears for thrusting. He had a javelin on his back between his shoulder. Javelin is for throwing, relatively medium range distance, right? So he was ready for all kinds of encounters, right? So what happens here is he goes out 40 days in a row, morning and evening, goading people, telling them, come out, somebody come out. Nobody does, of course. And, I mean, again, regardless of whether you believe this or not, this is what today we would describe as a robot, okay? Imagine someone who is 9'9", okay, just decked out in steel, in iron, and just clanking his weapons and telling you, come out and meet me, right? Who would go? Nobody would, right? I mean, we make science fiction like this today, right? I mean, we have Iron Man who basically looks like that, right? Iron Man is, well, and of course nowadays Iron Man can't even carry his own body armor, so we give him a joystick, right? And then he pushes a button and pew, flies off into the sunset, right? Well, get the fuck out, man. You can't even carry your own body armor, right? I mean, good riddance. Don't ever come back. Nobody wants to watch reruns of this anymore. Like, they lament why nobody goes to the movies. Well, because you can't create anything that makes any sense anymore, right? So anyway, this is a completely formidable opponent. Now, David is out herding sheep at this point because he's not playing the harp because King Saul is at war. He's not back in his castle, right? This is wartime. So what happens is Jesse, his father, tells David, go and check on your brothers. Here's a bunch of cheese. Give it to the captain of his brothers so that they can, probably obtain favor, right? I mean, this is an extremely concerned father. At that point, Jesse was an older man. He was very worried about his 3 sons. So the 3 eldest sons are along with King Saul in battle. David is herding sheep. So he tells him, go check on them and take a pledge from them, meaning ask them how they're doing, make sure they're okay, right? It's a very concerned father, normal thing. So David does what his father commands him and goes to the essentially the valley where they're fighting, the valley of Elah, and he sees this man out there goading people, and then he starts questioning what's going on here. What am I gonna get if because King Saul offered a whole lot to the person who's gonna go fight that man, and then David overhears this, and he kind of goes about and questions what's going on, and then he says, well, I'm going to go fight this guy, okay? I'm going to go fight him. Who is this guy? I don't care. I'm going to go fight him, right? So they tell King Saul, and then here's what happens. This is verses 34 to 35. He goes up to King Saul, and King Saul tells him, listen, kid, right? I mean, this man out there on the field, he has been a man of war from his youth. You are but a youth, right? So David is a young man. This man is an experienced killer, essentially, right? He's been a man of war from his youth. What are you thinking? Have you lost your mind? And here's what David responds whenever Saul objects to that or questions him. And David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock, and I went after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Okay, so lions were very common back then. And of course, this to a lot of people sounds unbelievable, but let's see what he says here, okay? When he arose against me, I caught him by his beard. Okay, so beard is the mane of a lion, and I actually saw a lion last week, believe it or not. Not back here, thankfully. It was in a zoo, but they do have manes. Okay, and then so this is caught him by the beard. So this is an extremely common tactic that ancient shepherds and ancient people knew is the only way you can survive if you get close to a lion, right? And that's a big if right there. So when you catch a lion by the mane, what you do is if you have enough strength, obviously, you immobilize the movement of the head, and then you neutralize the jaw so he can't bite you, okay? And this is precisely what David did. So, I mean, this was just regular course of business for him. He just didn't care. He cared about that one sheep, just like Jesus Christ cares about that one sheep, right? He goes after that one sheep. In this case, it was a lamb. He caught him by the beard, and then, of course, that helps him. They carried these clubs. In this book, it's called a staff, but they carried these clubs, and these clubs had nails at the very end of them just for emergencies like this, right? So if you catch the lion by the mane, and then you use that club or a dagger to hit him in the neck, then that lion is dead. I mean, it's just dead, period, right? So that's what happened. It's not that extraordinary. There's nothing miraculous here, okay? For David, this was regular course of business. He just went after that one lamb. So King Saul is like, well, okay, if you say so. Here's my mail coat of mail, and here's my sword. Go for it. So David dons that, and then, of course, you remember I told you earlier, King Saul was an imposing man. I mean, he was a head taller than everyone else, so of course he was no Goliath. There's no such thing as 9'9" in Israel at that point. He was, I mean, who knows how tall he was? Nobody tells you here, but he was probably, let's just say 6'7", 6'8", right? He was a head taller than everyone else, and of course that mail coat looks like and feels like an apron on David. So he says, I haven't proved that. I haven't used that, so I'm just going to simply not do this. I'm not going to wear this mail coat, and I'm not going to wear your sword. I'm not going to take your sword. So here's what David does. And this is verse 40 in chapter 17, again, book 1 of Samuel. And he took his staff in his hand and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a scrip. Scrip is just a bag name. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Okay? So, again, just the way he was. Shepherd's clothing. So at this point is when I was telling you earlier that Goliath saw him, disdained him, cursed him by his gods, by Goliath's gods, that is. And then here's what happens next. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. Okay? So unfortunately in today's society, we have somehow framed this as the underdog winning against the favorite, right? I mean, David was definitely shorter, if you will. He was the little guy, but he was absolutely not an underdog. This is complete insanity. I have no idea who reframed that. Let's just go over and see what's happening here, okay? So the first thing you have to remember is that this guy was carrying 172 pounds of body armor and weaponry, right? Javelin, spear, sword, chainmail, right? So even if you don't believe in the 9'9", imagine it's a 6'9" soldier, right? And we scale down, so now I'm going to scale down because the 172 pounds is extremely commensurate. It is very proportionate to someone who's 9'9", so it's completely believable. But if you don't believe the 9'9", and by the way, to my absolute horror, recently someone was talking about how these giants back then were some sort of a mixed breed between humans and something else. Complete nonsense. There's zero support for that in this book. They were just normal human beings, okay? Normal human beings that were just simply giant. That's it. And they were wiped off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. That's what happened to them. So, again, 172 pounds of body armor. If we scale down to someone that is 6'9", an athlete, let's just say, a basketball player, whatever, football player, that would be 100 pounds of body weight, right? I mean, body armor. He's not going to be running around a basketball court with 100 pounds of body armor and, dunking and just running around, right? I mean, this man was prepared to fight. This is a combat, right? Close combat. So this is not someone who's just going to run around. So that's number one. That's completely, how is that going to help him at all? David's got nothing, no body armor, nothing. And then here's what David does. He hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. So he starts running, right? So he just immediately starts running towards him, which of course it just shocks that guy. He's like, okay, what's going on here? We got this kid that's just essentially running towards me, right? So he gets a stone, a rock, smooth rock, out of his scrip, his shepherd's bag, and he slings it, right? He's slang it. So just to tell you about slingers, because now, just a little bit about Iron Age long-range weaponry. So at that time, this was the beginning of the Iron Age, so they did not have archers at that point, okay? So archery required, bows and arrows, right? I mean, they required some serious manufacturing. They also a huge amount of training. So at that point, archery did not exist, if you will. So what did exist, though, is these slingers, okay? And they were trained from their youth, okay? And just 2 books prior to this one, in the book of Judges, we're told that there were 700 Benjamites, so from the tribe of Benjamin, slingers, who could just hit a hare from a long distance, okay? Literally. I mean, this. So, now, just to let you know, people nowadays kind of like throwing javelins. There's some people that do slinging. The velocity of a rock, of a stone, slingers, is 150 miles per hour. Now, you remember what David did? He ran. So that even increases the velocity of that rock. So that thing is flying at your face at 155 miles per hour, probably, right? Even if it's 120, it doesn't matter. That thing is flying at your face. And now, remember, what did David do? How many stones did he get out of that brook? I just read that to you. Do you remember how many stones he got out of that brook? 5. Right? He got 5 stones out of that brook. David was ready for a long battle here, okay? He was going in knowing that he's going to win this, because even if he missed once, he knew he wasn't going to miss 5 times, okay? Now, what does Goliath have? Goliath had 1 javelin. David was never going to fight him on his terms, ever. David is extremely impulsive as a man, and we see that over and over again, but he is not insane. He's extremely strategic. He's not erratic at all, right? So he was getting ready for a long-term battle, and even if he didn't hit him in the forehead the first time, which he did, even if he didn't, if he just simply hit him somewhere else, he would have discomfited that man. And as he was running with that club, because he carried his staff, he would have just ripped his face off before he even hit the ground, okay? Especially after he cursed him the way that he did. So there is no doubt in my mind that if I was a gambling man, I would have bet on David, knowing the history of these people, okay? I mean, this is just regular course of business. Goliath stood no chance. It's kind of like, think about it this way. You have a man with a javelin, and then you have someone with a 5-shooter, except his bullets are in the revolver right there in his bag. So that's exactly what's going on. If he had missed once, he would have ran circles around him until he hit him again, okay? No chance at all. Goliath stood probably 1 in 50 chance just facing him. Once David starts running, there's almost no chance that he's going to survive that battle. But again, we have reframed that, and it is the way it is. So now at this point, what happens, David doesn't have a sword, so he runs over, lobs his head off, he cuts his head off, and of course that's the famous, let's go, right? And it's a complete rout. It's a bloodbath. They chase him all the way down to the gates of Ekron, their cities out there, and they spoil their tents. So spoiling their tents means they just looted them, killed them all, looted them, and then at that point, David goes back to to King Saul with Goliath's head. David, by the way, kept the sword. He kept the sword, and in fact, that sword comes into play many, many years later. He also kept his mail coat, Goliath's mail coat, in his tent. So I guess like a little souvenir, kind of like whenever in Europe when people play soccer, they exchange their jerseys, kind of like that. So David brings the head of Goliath, and I don't know if he had left that head over there on the field, and then when he was coming back, I might as well grab that on the way back to King Saul. I have no idea how that worked out. It didn't tell us, but he brings the head to King Saul, and then King Saul says, oh, wow, who's your family, this and that. Of course, he knew who David was because he played the harp, but King Saul had a massive entourage of people, so it's not like... But anyway, he, at that point, David becomes extremely popular with the folks, with the nation, and then the next scene we have, and this is in chapter 18, is just really a very endearing chapter. It's about the relationship that David develops with the son of King Saul. His name is Jonathan, of course. Jonathan, a very popular name nowadays. It was a name 3,000 years ago. Very endearing. I encourage you to read that. David was very much loved by his friends. He was very, very much loved, and who wouldn't love a friend like that, right? I mean, he would have gone to the ends of the earth to, say I get lost in this wilderness behind me. I mean, he would bulldoze that place and at least find my body before the dogs eat it, right? I mean, he was that kind of person. There was just the mercy, the grace, just the loyalty and the commitment. I mean, just an incredible man. I'll read you just one verse over here. What chapter 18 talks about David and Jonathan. It came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that is, as David is carrying the head of Goliath. And it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. So there's a lot of souls here, but the King Saul is Saul. So what this describes is just an extremely close friendship between Jonathan and David. Of course, down the road, Jonathan saves David's life, and just a beautiful relationship between those two. This becomes extremely popular. He gets to be a commander of thousands of people. People love him, and at that point, women, for some reason, to this day, I have no idea why women love that man, but they start singing a song about David, okay? And that upsets King Saul a whole lot, because those women attribute a whole lot to David, not as much to King Saul, right? So, again, at that point, King Saul had a evil spirit, and he became really jealous of David being the popular general. And then the phrasing here is, and so I, David, from that day and forward. So him, right? So Saul gets into these fits of rage, and there's one incident where David plays the harp, and Saul gets extremely upset. And here's what happens. And Saul cast a javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. So you can see here, just like it would have been had Goliath thrown that javelin at David, he would have avoided it very easily. Here at close range, we have King Saul throwing the javelin at David to attach him to the wall, literally, and David avoids it twice. So at this point, King Saul is trying to figure out ways to get to David, and then he tries to marry his eldest daughter to David. But for some reason, and we're not told exactly what, she ends up marrying another man. So what happens here is how we get introduced to Michal. Michal is the other daughter of King Saul, and Michal is spelled Michal. So kind of like Michael, and a lot of people that read the book, they pronounce that name Michael, which I'm fine with. When I first read that, I hadn't heard someone else pronounce it, and I, for some reason, automatically pronounced it Michal, which is apparently the Hebrew way of pronouncing that word. So anyway, I keep saying Michal, but Michael, Michal, whatever. So here's what happens. This is his other daughter, and I'm going to read that to you. So this is in chapter 18, verses 20 through 21. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. And Saul said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in the one of the twain. Okay? So, of course, this is not exactly the way that you want your father to treat you, but we're told here that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, okay? This is repeated again later on. And he's using his daughter against David. The thing pleased him. I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him, right? And that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So, at that point, David acts demure. He's like, well, who am I to marry the daughter of a king, right? That's I'm just a poor man is what he says. Not essentially, but that's literally what he says. So here's what King Saul offered to David for his daughter. Okay? And Saul said, "Thus shall ye say to David, the king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines to be avenged of the king's enemies." But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. So there are three things going on here in just one verse, okay? Three things going on. Oh, well, I guess I'll miss that sunset. Three things going on in this verse. So the king desireth not any dowry. So in the English-speaking world, and of course in the English-speaking world culture, you're kind of like, if I don't know if you caught that or not, but desireth not any dowry. Why would the king desire dowry, right? I mean, in an English-speaking country, it's the opposite, right? The family of the bride gives money to the groom or the couple, right? That's the money flow in today's world. I have no idea where that came from, but that is not what this society did. It was completely the opposite. So in dowry back then, in this book, right, there are two money flows. And those money flows are from groom to the father of the bride, and then from the family of the bride to the bride. So it's almost a circular money flow, right? So you go groom, right, as security if something were to happen, right? That was the money flow in that society. So again, where we have it in the English-speaking world, I have no idea, but that's how it was back then. So that's why it may sound strange to people. The king desired not any dowry, but 100 foreskins. 100 foreskins, and if you don't know what a foreskin is, you should probably look that up because the rest of the story is not going to make much sense to you. Now, don't look up any images because you're going to lose your lunch on the floor, right? That charcuterie that you had last night. So this is pretty brutal, right? He's asking for 100 foreskins. So that society back then was circumcised. So they were circumcised on the 8th day. Every male child was circumcised on the 8th day, which, in case you don't know, this is why the new year starts 8 days after Christmas, right? Jesus Christ was born on the 25th, and then you have 6, 7, 8, 9, 30, 31. The 8th day, right, is when he was circumcised. That's New Year, right? That's our New Year. So, but the opposing army, the opposing tribes, they were not circumcised, so he's requesting 100 foreskins, right? So that's a very degrading and very dangerous, right? This is a very dangerous request instead of dowry, instead of money, because David told him that he's poor, which at that point he was, unlike what happened later on. And then the third thing, obviously here, that it tells us, but Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. So David was essentially thrown to the wolves to get killed. That's what King Saul wanted to do. He wanted to kill David, and this was one way to do it, okay? So here's what David's response to this is, right? And here's what happens afterwards. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David because King Saul told his servants, and then the servants went in secret and told David. It pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired, which means the deal had not expired. Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law, and so gave him Michal his daughter to wife. Oh, man. So they killed 200 Philistines, and they obtained the foreskins. Now, again, we're talking about one of the smartest men that ever lived, right? He didn't go out there and, give me the scissors, boys. I got this, right? I mean, of course not, right? At the very least, depending on how tired they were, they probably caught 201 people and told them, well, 200 of you are going to die. One of you is going to be cutting foreskins and obtaining them and putting them in a bag and presenting them to me. Who wants to do it, right? And the answer, me. They were all probably jumping up there to get in line. And who knows? I mean, this guy's extremely creative. Again, depending on how tired they were, they could have created some sort of a Super Bowl scheme, right? Put them in teams, and then the winner gets a bag of foreskins, or kind of like the Bachelorette, right? Here's your rose. Instead, you get a bag of 200 foreskins. But either way, I can only imagine knocking on that castle, and then this guy's expecting to see a dead man, right? I mean, a ghost. And then instead, what he sees is David holding a bag of 200 foreskins in full tail. That means full count, right? So I don't know if they counted them right there or not, but either way, man, I don't know. What do you, I mean, King Saul kind of misjudged the situation big time over here, and I have no idea what he did with those foreskins. I mean, what do you do? I don't know. Light them up and grow some hot dogs, or again, I have no idea what he did with that. Either way, Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, to wife. Of course, nowadays, with our imagination, we got characters like, fake characters like, some guy, Christian Grey. What a disgrace to that name, right? And he's got whips and chains. I mean, imagine going home with someone who just gave your dad 200 foreskins. Oh boy, right? I mean, and this was David. I mean, he was an escalator, right? He just escalated it big time, and he was full of grace. He was full of life. He was so real. As I mentioned earlier, if you see a man like that in real life, you just simply, your jaw would drop, right? I mean, it's not the glamour of celebrities. This is just someone who was extremely real. And I'm going to talk a whole lot about him, right? I mean, if God talked about him so many times, then you better believe I'll talk about him a whole lot, right? I mean, this man was, one incident comes to mind whenever they recover the Ark of the Covenant, and then they're coming back to Jerusalem. And there's a massive procession, right? I mean, David ultimately created a military marching band, if you will, an orchestra, and they were just playing music, and David was dancing half naked on the streets of Jerusalem. This is after he had become king, right? He did not care about his reputation, and his wife called him out and said, "You're debasing yourself in front of your servants' maids," right? And he said, "Oh, I will debase myself even more," right? Because that's the only thing he cared about. And that book tells you specifically that he was dancing with all of his might, all of his strength. That guy was strong, right? I mean, he was jumping like a maniac, half naked. He did not care about his reputation. This is all he cared about, right? So this is the kind of man we're talking about here. And we should all ask ourselves that question, right? What is it in life that excites you this much that you're willing to risk your reputation and everything that you've built in your life, right? I mean, we have people that are coming back from Super Bowl wins. They sit on a floaty and drink cheap beer, right? That's how excited they look. So this man was completely the opposite, right? I mean, he was full of life. He was real. And his stories are amazing. So I'm going to talk a whole lot about him. And I guess for now, that's going to be it. May God bless you all. Thank you for listening. And, I hope you enjoyed the sunset too, take care.